Imagine you're sitting in a really chaotic emergency room tonight, right? Waiting for a diagnosis. What if I told you that the most accurate medical mind in the building might not be the attending physician who spent, a decade in medical school?
Right, it might actually be a piece of software. And I think the wildest part of that reality is that when researchers put this to the test, the doctors who are evaluating these diagnoses couldn't even tell the difference between the human and the machine.
Yeah, 94% of the time.
Exactly. I mean, the whole paradigm of what constitutes an expert in a clinical setting is shifting right beneath our feet. We are so profoundly conditioned to trust the human element in medicine.
Oh, totally. We look for the gray hair.
Yeah, the gray hair, the years of residency, that intuition built over thousands of patient encounters. But realizing that an algorithm can not only match, but actually exceed that human reasoning in high-stakes scenarios, it completely redefines the whole concept of medical care for you.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore a truly groundbreaking 2026 paper from the journal Science. It's titled Performance of a Large Language Model on the Reasoning Tasks of a Physician.
Right, and we're looking at a study that basically took OpenAI's O1 preview model and just dropped it into some of the most grueling, complex medical scenarios imaginable, literally pitting it head-to-head against hundreds of human doctors.
Which is why we're so excited to get into this, because, whether you are a tech enthusiast, a healthcare professional, or just someone who will inevitably need medical care one day, this deep dive is going to completely reframe how you think about getting a second opinion.
It really is. Because the stakes of this research are incredibly personal for anyone listening. If you have ever waited like 4 hours in an ER lobby or worried that a rushed doctor missed a subtle symptom in your chart.
I know I have.
Right, we all have. And the mechanics of what we're about to discuss could literally be the difference between a misdiagnosis and a saved life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because evaluating medical AI used to be like testing a calculator on basic math. You'd feed the system a list of symptoms, and it would spit out a textbook definition.
Yeah, it was just basic pattern matching.
Right, but now we're basically dropping it into an escape room with a ticking clock. To understand why this paper is making such massive waves, we have to look at the history of how we measure artificial intelligence in medicine.
Well, testing AI diagnostic tools isn't exactly new. It actually dates way back to a landmark 1959 paper by Ledley and Lusted.
1959? Wait, really?
Yeah, way back then. They were the first to argue that you cannot test a diagnostic system on simple medical trivia. They established that the gold standard for evaluation had to be complex, multi-layered clinical cases.
So you have to test the system's reasoning, not just its memory.
Exactly.
So the goalpost has basically been the same since before the moon landing. But for decades, early AI systems, things like those Bayesian networks, they just failed miserably at this rate.
Oh, they failed completely. Those early Bayesian networks were basically giant, rigid mathematical flowcharts. They operated on strict probabilities, like if symptom A is present, there's a 20% chance of disease B.
But human biology is rarely that neat,
Never that neat. A patient might have, like, 3 overlapping conditions taking 4 different medications with a totally atypical presentation. The rigid flowcharts would just break down.
So they performed so poorly that researchers didn't even need to compare them to human doctors. There's just no point.
Right. But then large language models entered the chat, and everything flipped. Suddenly, the AI isn't just following a rigid flowchart. It's passing the U.S. medical licensing exam.
It's solving complex engineering problems.
Yeah.
We've hit this wall that researchers call benchmark saturation.
Yeah, and benchmark saturation happens when a test is no longer difficult enough to measure the upper limits of an intelligence. LLMs have completely saturated the traditional medical benchmarks.
So if every single student in a class gets an A+ on the final exam, the test is basically broken. You don't know who the actual genius is.
Exactly. They are acing the multiple choice questions and the clean, textbook-perfect clinical vignettes, which highlights the critical gap in all the previous research.
Right, because a lot of recent headlines claim AI beats doctors. But those studies often tested the AI in a vacuum, right? On really narrow, highly curated tasks.
Precisely. They didn't have an actual human physician baseline doing real clinically grounded work. To truly understand the limits of an AI, we need to know how it stacks up against the experts who are currently making life or death decisions on the floor of a hospital.
We have to force the AI to do the actual heavy lifting of clinical reasoning, which brings us to the methodology of this 2026 study.
Right.
Because since the AI has outgrown the old tests, we needed a tougher arena. How exactly do you put an AI head-to-head with hundreds of doctors?
That brings us to the gauntlet. The researchers built a really comprehensive 6-part methodology. They didn't just give the AI one test, they ran it through 6 distinct experiments.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with the academic side of things.
Yeah, so the first phase utilized highly rigorous, established benchmarks. They started with 143 clinical pathological conferences from the New England Journal of Medicine.
Wow.
These are notoriously difficult, complex medical mysteries designed to stump even seasoned specialists.
But they didn't just want to see if the AI could guess the final disease, right? They wanted to evaluate how it was thinking.
Yes, which is where the 𝗠𝗲𝗄𝗆 cases come into play.
Yeah.
They ran 20 of these virtual patient encounters and evaluated the AI using something called the RIDA scale. It's a validated 10-point scoring system.
So it doesn't just grade the final answer, it grades the documentation of the clinical reasoning. Like, did you document why a specific symptom is concerning? Did you logically rule out the alternatives?
Precisely. It's the classic show your work requirement from high school math, but for life-saving medicine. They also tested 5 gray matters management cases, scored by 25 experts, and 5 cases focused on probabilistic reasoning.
I want to pause on that for a second. What does probabilistic reasoning actually look like in an ER? Are we talking about the AI calculating literal percentages of diseases?
In clinical practice, yeah, probabilistic reasoning is the ability to assign a mathematical likelihood to a diagnosis before you even run a test, what we call the pretest probability.
Okay.
Then, once the blood work or the x-ray comes back, you have to accurately update that percentage to find your post-test probability. Humans are notoriously bad at this kind of statistical updating.
We tend to overestimate or underestimate based on our gut feelings.
Exactly. The researchers wanted to see if the AI could crunch those clinical odds more accurately.
So that's the academic gauntlet. But there's always a lingering skepticism with AI. Did it actually reason through the problem, or did it just regurgitate something it memorized from its training data?
Data contamination is a massive problem in AI research. If an AI read the New England Journal of Medicine during its training, of course it knows the answer to a published case study.
Right, so how do they solve that?
To solve this, they moved to the unreleased cases. They tested the AI on 6 landmark diagnostic cases from a famous historical study that have never been publicly released or digitized.
They are literally sitting in a vault.
Yep, they're sitting in a vault.
I love that. It's a true blind test. The AI is completely cut off from its memory banks and forced to think on its feet. But even a secret historical case is still curated. You know, it's still a neat little package of text.
Right.
The next phase of this study is what completely blew my mind because they finally took the training wheels off.
The main event. The 6th most intense experiment. They took 76 real cases directly from the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center emergency room. We're talking about actual patients with all the chaos that entails.
Oh, wow. Actual chaotic patient records?
Yeah, and they took the OpenAI O1 preview model, its predecessor GPT-4o, and 2 human attending physicians, and had them evaluate these patients at 3 distinct, high-stakes stages of an ER visit.
The initial triage at the front door, the actual evaluation by the ER doctor, and the final decision of whether to admit the patient to the hospital or send them home.
Exactly. And to ensure the grading was completely unbiased, there's a crucial detail. The 2 senior doctors evaluating the results were totally blinded.
Wait, could the evaluating doctors really not tell if a robot or a human wrote the diagnosis? I feel like AI usually has that, overly formal chatbot flavor, you know, while a tired doctor's chart is full of shorthand.
You might assume that, but the researchers actually formatted the AI's output to match standard clinical note structures. They completely stripped away the conversational chatbot flavor to isolate the pure clinical reasoning.
So what happened? Did they notice?
The result is astonishing. One evaluator selected can't tell 83.6% of the time. The other evaluator guessed can't tell an amazing 94.4% of the time.
The medical reasoning was entirely indistinguishable from a human expert.
Entirely.
That is wild. A literal Turing test for medicine, and the machine passed almost flawlessly. So the gauntlet is thrown, the tests are rigorous. How did the AI actually perform when the scores were tallied?
The models absolutely crushed the benchmarks. Let's look back at those 𝗠𝗲𝗄𝗆 cases, the ones measuring the clinical reasoning using that 10-point RIDA scale. Out of 80 total cases evaluated, the O1 preview model got a perfect score on 78 of them.
78 out of 80? That is insane.
It significantly outperformed its predecessor, GPT-4, but more importantly, it outperformed the resident physicians and the highly experienced attending physicians.
Getting the diagnosis right is one thing, though, but what happens after you know what's wrong? That brings us to the gray matters management cases, right?
Yes, and this is where we see the most staggering gap in the entire study. These cases don't just ask what the disease is, they ask how you treat this specific patient when the standard treatments fail.
Okay, so how did they do?
On the management cases, the O1 model scored a median of 89%. The human physicians who were given access to their conventional everyday medical reference tools scored a median of just 34%.
Hold on, 34%. That sounds almost unbelievably low for trained doctors taking an open book test. Why did the human experts fail so spectacularly while the AI excelled?
It really comes down to how human brains function under the weight of immense complexity versus how a computational reasoning tree works. Humans rely heavily on heuristics, mental shortcuts, and pattern recognition.
So if a doctor sees 10 patients with a cough and a fever, their shortcut quickly points to the flu.
Right. But management cases often feature rare conditions or cascading complications, what we call zebras in medicine. When a case breaks the standard pattern, human doctors often suffer from anchoring bias.
Where they just latch on to their first plausible idea.
Exactly. or they simply experience cognitive fatigue trying to hold 20 variables in their head at once.
While the AI just systematically maps out every possible branch of the decision tree, it doesn't get tired and it doesn't get attached to its first guess.
Exactly the point. The AI processes every variable probabilistically. It calculates the statistical likelihood of every treatment path simultaneously, something a human brain physically cannot do.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The real-world ER results. Because a messy, real-life patient in the emergency room is the ultimate test of managing variables. And the O1 model outperformed the human attendings at every single touchpoint.
It did. Triage, evaluation, and admission. But what fascinates me is where the AI had the biggest advantage over the human doctors. The widest performance gap occurred at the very first touchpoint, the initial ER triage.
Where information is the most limited.
Exactly. When a patient first walks in, you might have a chief complaint. My chest hurts, maybe a blood pressure reading, and a pulse. That is it. Yet, even with that microscopic amount of data, the AI was able to identify the exact or very close diagnosis 67.1% of the time.
Wow. And the humans?
The two human doctors hit only 55.3% and 50%.
It's like solving a puzzle without the picture on the box, you know? Human doctors are detectives looking for a familiar suspect, a smoking gun. If there's barely any evidence, they struggle to build a narrative.
Right.
But the AI doesn't need a narrative. It just takes the single thread left at the scene and instantly maps it against a matrix of every known medical case in history. It seems like the less information there is, the better the AI is at finding the hidden pattern compared to the human brain.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the mechanism at play. As more information became available later in the ER visit lab results, imaging both the humans and the AI improved their diagnostic accuracy. The humans started to find their smoking gun, but the AI still maintained its overall lead.
It is a monumental leap forward. But as with any major scientific breakthrough, we have to look at the fine print, right? Because the AI is brilliant at math, but it's not ready to replace the staff at your local hospital tomorrow.
Not at all. There are major limitations keeping this out of the emergency room right now. The most glaring barrier is what we call the text-only limitation. These models exist entirely in a world of written language.
Meaning they only process text.
Right. The AI cannot hear a patient's labored, wheezing breath. It can't look at the pale, clammy skin of someone going into shock or feel the rigid abdomen of an internal hemorrhage. It has no physical senses.
Which means it is entirely dependent on a human being to translate those physical realities into text. If a rushed triage nurse misses a crucial physical cue and doesn't type it into the patient's chart, the AI is completely blind to it. Point. Efficiency doesn't always equal practical care. But what about the sensory problem? How do we solve the text-only barrier so the AI isn't relying on a tired human to type in every single symptom?
The research points heavily toward a multimodal future. The solution isn't just better text processing, it's ambient passive monitoring.
Like ambient AI scribes.
Yes. Imagine an AI system integrated directly into the exam room. It isn't just reading the doctor's type notes. It have a microphone analyzing the acoustic signature of the patient's cough.
Oh, wow.
It has optical sensors detecting the patient's skin pallor or tracking their restricted movement. It integrates directly with the visual data from an ultrasound in real time. By processing audio and visual input simultaneously with the medical history, we finally close the gap between the digital brain and the physical patient.
So what does this all mean? For you, the listener, the biggest takeaway is that the future of medicine is no longer some sci-fi concept waiting in the wings. It has officially arrived.
It really has.
Large language models have eclipsed historical clinical reasoning benchmarks. They are fundamentally better at processing vast arrays of medical probabilities than the human brain, pulling hidden diagnoses out of thin air, even in the chaotic, data-poor environment of an ER triage desk.
And while the idea of an algorithm diagnosing your illness might sound a bit cold or intimidating, look at the potential reality it offers. This technology could drastically mitigate the massive human and financial costs of diagnostic errors.
And those terrible long wait times.
Exactly. It could take an emergency room with a 4-hour wait time and turn it into a hyper-efficient triage center where life-threatening conditions are flagged by the AI in seconds. It democratizes access to the smartest, most comprehensive medical reasoning on the planet.
It is an incredibly powerful safety net that will undoubtedly save lives. But I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on, something outside the immediate data of this specific study.
Okay.
If we build this multimodal future and AI becomes the ultimate, flawless diagnostic tool handling all the complex triage and reasoning before a human doctor even steps into the room, how will the next generation of physicians learn?
That is the real question.
Medical intuition isn't magic, you know. It is built by struggling through thousands of complex, confusing cases. If the algorithm solves the puzzle before the medical resident ever gets a chance to try, what happens to human medical intuition a decade from now? Do we risk a future where human doctors forget how to think simply because the machine is too good at it?
It's definitely something we have to figure out.
Next time you find yourself sitting in a chaotic waiting room, look around at the screens and the staff and ask yourself who or what is really putting the pieces of your puzzle together. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep questioning the world around you.